Ah, oh, wow. Okay. Welcome to 7 p.m. It's in the book literature study meeting. My name is Eileen, and I am an alcoholic.
Hey, Eileen.
Hey, everybody. Please join me in a moment of silent meditation to reflect on why we are here, followed by the Serenity Prayer. Serenity Prayer?
God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the good prayer.
In this meeting, we study the entire text of Alcoholics Anonymous and Dr. Bob's Nightmare. And now we have Meredith.
Hey, everybody. My name is Meredith. I'm an alcoholic. It's good to be here tonight, especially because we're starting over in the front of the book. And I love doing that. And just by way of introduction, my very first sponsor suggested I read this book as a means of diagnosing myself as whether I'm alcoholic or not. She said, probably a lot of people, have opinions about whether you are or not. And you've heard a lot of people say they are, but the best way to figure it out is to read this text, highlight what you identify with. And she simply explained if you can identify with the problem, which is step 1 is up to page 51. So if you can identify with the reading up to that point, step 2 is up to that point. So step one is up to that point, even though they do step 1 on page 30. There's even more diagnostic having to deal with the spirituality aspect and the spiritual bankruptcy aspect of our being. So there's a lot of pages to read and to identify. And she said, the more you can embrace those pages and identify with those, the more the solution will work for you. And it seemed like a very practical way to say it. Because if you identify with this, then the solution's going to work. And I kind of went with that. And it turns out that was true for me. I found myself in a lot of these pages. But we started, I'll never forget when I asked her to be my temporary sponsor. She asked me if I wanted temporary sobriety. And I said, well, no. And then she said, and I had a big book. I'd carried it around for 13 years and never opened it. And she said, she opened up the blank page. She said, here's what you know about getting sober. And I was like, great. I just liked her 5 minutes ago, and now she's telling me stuff. I'm like, but she said, you know all about the drinking game, but you don't know how to get sober because if you did, you wouldn't have asked for my help. So, and a lot of people introduce the book that way. And then this page, I have a good friend who says, how many words are on that page? Can anybody see how many words? Okay. 2. So it's the test page. If you see 2, you can keep going. So it says Alcoholics Anonymous. And anonymous means having an unknown name or identity. Just FYI. It's one of the words I didn't look up for a long time, and yet it's in the title of this book that I study. And then there's a list of other books, and these are other books printed by Alcoholics Anonymous worldwide, and they are in addition to. So my sponsor shows me how. Well, we'll get there. So then the next page, this is the title page where the title's written again because it was written on the other one, but that was the test page. So this is the title page, and right beneath the title, it says Alcoholics Anonymous, and then it says the story of how many thousands of men and women have recovered from alcoholism. And my sponsor indicated that's the first promise. She goes, it's the story of how because you don't know how. And I'm like, yeah, I remember you told me that. And then have recovered, past tense, from alcoholism. And to recover something is to regain something that was lost, as in health. If I've recovered from an illness, I am past the illness. Okay? And then Bill Wilson talked about this word alcoholism, and he described it as the obsession of the mind, which compels us to drink, and the allergy of the body that condemns us to go mad or die. And that's how he described it in AA Comes of Age many, many years ago. All right. And then we flip it over, we will see the copyright dates. And each copyright date is a copyright of another edition. So the first edition was copyrighted in 1939, the second edition, 1955, and then the third in 1976, and then the fourth in 2001. All right. So that's opposite the table of contents. And then underneath that shows how many printings. Like the first edition had 16 printings. and the second had 16. The third had 74. Now, my book, the fourth edition, was first printed in 2001, but I have the 38th printing in 2017. And the latest printing I have record of is the 48th in November 2022. Does anybody have a later printing than the 48th? No. Okay. So what was pointed out to me was they don't do repeated printings of books that people don't read. So this is being read a lot. That's the sign of a good book. Okay. And then at the bottom of that page, it shows the Library of Congress number, and that's in the disease section. It's a textbook. It is listed as a textbook in the Library of Congress. It's about the disease of alcoholism, which we will learn is trifold. Okay. Then the table of contents, preface, all the forwards. Each edition has its own forward. Then the doctor's opinion and Bill's story, which lay out the problem. There's a solution and more about alcoholism, and we agnostics lay out more, having it leading toward the solution, and then how it works into action and working with others, a practical program of action. So that's how it's laid out. And then we have the personal stories, and they're done in 3 parts. The pioneers of AA, the people that first got sober, and then they stopped in time, people that didn't have to hit rock bottom to get sober. And then part 3, people that lost nearly everything. And what it tells about the stories later on, and they'll say, we hope that you can find some identification somewhere in these stories. And if not, certainly in some of these meetings, right? And then after the table of contents, and for me, it's page X, which is 10, it lists the appendices, which are in addition to the text. And there's some very interesting appendices here too. So there's great information in here, and some of it can be a little dry, but it all points to the same place. And so it's worth going over. So we are going to start in the preface, and that's that. And Eileen is our reader.
Okay. Preface. This is the 4th edition of the book Alcoholics Anonymous. The first edition appeared in April 1939, and in the following 16 years, more than 300,000 copies went into circulation. The second edition, published in 1955, reached a total of more than 1,150,000. The third edition, which came off press in 1979, achieved a circulation of approximately 19,550,000 in all formats.
I did a Big Book trivia game that we used a couple years in a row at a conference. And one of the trivia questions, there were 4 categories, and one was AA history. Anybody know who received the 1,000th copy of the Big Book? It was a statesman. It was someone in politics. Richard M. Nixon got the 1,000th copy of the Big Book. So,
Was he alcoholic?
No, I don't know why he got it. I don't know if he did some kind of a program, or if they just thought maybe Trisha, who knows. So anyway, but he got the 1,000th copy.
Okay, good. Because this book has become the basic text for our society, it has helped such large numbers of alcoholic men and women to recovery. There exists strong sentiment against any radical changes being made in it. Therefore, the first portion of this volume describing the AA recovery program has been left largely untouched in the course of revisions made for the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th editions. The section called The Doctor's Opinion has been kept intact, just as it was originally written in 1939 by the late Dr. William D. Silpor, our society's great medical benefactor.
Okay, so a couple of important words to note in that paragraph. Text, right? A textbook is, think of math. You have a textbook. I don't know about you, but I had a math teacher, and if he wasn't up there in front of the classroom, I never would have known what that book said, because he went off book a lot and just did things on the overhead projector, which made a lot more sense than the stuff on the paper. So it's always good to have somebody who knows the material to teach it, or at least has some experience of it. And so a textbook is something we study and then put into practice. Okay. Now, the other important word is program, because we hear that word a lot. I came into the program. I was coming to AA meetings for a long time before I went anywhere near the program. So the program is actually what we do once we get here. Okay. And the definition of a program that I like is a plan under which action is taken toward a goal, right? The 12 steps. It's like a workout program. I can go to the gym if I want to lose weight, and I can bring my latte in there and sit on the bike and talk to people. Or I can stop at the desk and say, I am overweight and I need a trainer. And then they're going to collect all this data like a 4-step, right? And they're going to tell me what the data says like a 5th step. And then they're going to have me do stuff like the 9th step, right? So they're going to have me do certain exercises, certain things to get results. And that's what these 12 steps do also. We do certain exercises to get a result.
Click. The second edition added the appendices, the 12 traditions, and the directions for getting in touch with AA. But the chief change was in the section of personal stories, which was expanded to reflect the fellowship's growth. Bill's story, Dr. Bob's nightmare, and one other personal history from the first edition were retained intact. 3 were edited and 1 was retitled. New versions of 2 stories were written with new titles. 30 completely new stories were added, and the story section was divided into 3 parts under the same heading that are used now. In the third edition, Part 1, Pioneers of AA, was left unchanged. 9 of the stories in Part 2, They Stopped in Time, were carried over from the second edition. 8 new stories were added. In Part 3, they lost nearly all. 8 stories were retained. 5 new ones were added.
The point of all that is they're going to be very transparent. They're not going to keep any secrets. They're going to let us know exactly what happened and what changes were made. And usually, and they're done to keep up with the changes in the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. In the beginning, it was all a bunch of men. Where women didn't come in for the first year, I think, or so, year and a half. Marty Mann from Connecticut was our first woman member. And then you can look now and look at the change in all of us. So it has to keep up with that.
The 4th edition includes the 12 concepts for world service and revises the 3 sections of personal stories as follows. 1 new story has been added to Part 1, and 2 that originally appeared in Part 3 have been repositioned there. 6 stories have been deleted. 6 of the stories in Part 2 have been carried over. 11 new ones have been added, and 11 taken in. Part 3 now includes 12 new stories. 8 were removed, in addition to the 2 that were transferred to Part 1. And if you can keep track of all that, you're better than I. All changes have been made over the years of the Big Book. AA members' fond nickname for this volume have had the same purpose, to represent the current membership of Alcoholics Anonymous more accurately, and thereby to reach more alcoholics. If you've had a drinking problem, we hope that you may pause in reading one of the 42 personal stories and think, yes, this happened to me. Or more important, yes, I felt like that. Or most important, yes, I believe this program can work for me too.
Okay. Deep breath and forward to the first edition.
Okay. Forward to the first edition. This is the forward as it appeared in the first printing of the first edition in 1939. We of Alcoholics Anonymous are more than 100 men and women who have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. To show other alcoholics precisely how we have recovered is the main purpose of this book. For them, we hope these pages will prove so convincing that no further authentication will be necessary. We think this account of our experiences will help everyone to better understand the alcoholic. Many do not comprehend that the alcoholic is a very sick person, and besides, we are sure that our way of living has its advantages for all.
Okay, so we of Alcoholics Anonymous, try to remember as we come across the word we in this book, it doesn't reflect we, the people in the room. It's we, the experience of the first 40 to 100 alcoholics that came into AA, although there were some primary contributors. So we is we, the authors, all right? And it says more than 100 men and women who have recovered, there's that past tense again, from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. So to break that down a little bit, we are not, it says, from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. We appear hopeless to others, right? By the time we get here, we feel like there's no hope, or maybe we still think we got it going on. But most of our family feels like there's no hope. That I can assure you. But we actually do have hope because we recover. But the important thing to understand is, so there's a state of mind component. So a seemingly hopeless state of mind says, hey, we're sick in the head, for starters. And then it says, and a hopeless state of body, which means we're also physically sick. And that's pretty sick. Mentally and physically, that's pretty sick. And what they're saying is we can recover from that seemingly hopeless state of mind and body, but only to the extent that we don't drink alcohol. We can do something about the way our minds are. We cannot cure the allergy. So that's why they use the word recovered instead of cured. The allergy is not cured. It is arrested because we don't drink. All right. So we have no spiritual strength over that. We have no mental strength over that. But if we do what it says to get our thinking straight, we won't feel it necessary to go back to the bottle and trigger that physical allergy. Okay. And then the next sentence says to show other alcoholics precisely how we have recovered is the main purpose of this book. So first of all, it's our job to demonstrate that we recover. So it's not just enough to read this book, but to live this and show people how this actually works and to talk about how we got there. Talk about your 4-step with people. Talk about what happened when you did your 5th step. Some people threw. I felt great. So we talk about these things so that people can understand. So it's not a big cloudy mystery of what's happening here, because that's what's going to attract more people. And then it talks about, it's also in italics. Okay, precisely how we have recovered. Precisely means exactly and without mistake. Strong sponsorship will give very precise direction, just like the book does. All right. You're not going to hear me say, call me sometime this week. People that I sponsor will know what time they're calling me. We've agreed on it. All right. Because we need to see if we can follow precise direction. Not only that, but life is very precise. This gives us a way to train us how to show up. Okay. And then it talks about for them, meaning for alcoholics, we hope these pages will prove so convincing that no further authentication will be necessary. No further proof will be necessary. If you're like me, you probably tried a few self-help books before you got here, maybe some psychological stuff, maybe some spiritual stuff. I have bookshelves full of stuff that only a teeny smidge of those are completed. They're reading. Some I just made a dent and then put it back on the shelf. So what they're saying is you don't need any more proof than this book to figure out if you are an alcoholic. This is what we need. This is the basic text. Let's just keep it simple. One book. Let's get through this. See what's left over. All right. And then it talks about, so the main purpose is that. The main purpose is to show other alcoholics how to recover. So this is the textbook this week in show how. All right. So there's a secondary purpose. And what is that? Well, to better understand the alcoholic. To comprehend that the alcoholic is a very sick person. That's important for family members, even for ourselves. I didn't realize just how mentally and physically ill I was. I didn't know that there's a spiritual component. I kind of thought, I got a problem with drinking. If I can ever get that under control, I'm going to a shrink. Right? But it turns out everything for you was solved for me under one umbrella. I went to a therapist many, many years later for something related. But I didn't need psychotherapy once I'd gotten through these steps. Some people do, but it just wasn't my story. And then it says, so we have to remember we're a very sick person. I'm the first one that has to know that. And then it says, we are sure our way of living has its advantages for all. That was a nod to what was going to become all the other fellowships that grew out of this. I put a note here that says, see page 571. And page 571 is one of the appendices. And the appendices is about the Lasker Award. And it was an award given to, every year it was given to some program or agency that promoted something in the way of mental health, that somehow moved forward a social issue. And in this case, it says in 1951, the Lasker Award was given to Alcoholics Anonymous. And it says in part, the American Public Health Association, that's the one that gives this award out, presents the Lasker Group Award to Alcoholics Anonymous in recognition of its unique and highly successful approach to that age-old public health and social problem, alcoholism. All right. So this 12-step program found a way to help people with something that had not really made any impact prior. And it says, in emphasizing alcoholism as an illness, the social stigma associated with this condition is being blotted out. Historians may one day recognize Alcoholics Anonymous to have been a great venture in social pioneering, which forged a new instrument for social action, a new therapy based on the kinship of common suffering, one having a vast potential for the myriad other ills of mankind. That's really phenomenal.
1951.
To be recognized, right? And talk about this, a new kind of therapy, which is equal footing. One sicko talking to another one who's recovered from that semi-hopeless state of mind, something we can relate to and not feel like we're being talked down to or lectured to or preached at. That was a game changer. And think about the myriad social ills. What other social ills have been have had a therapy of 12 steps grow out of them? Gamblers Anonymous? Cocaine Anonymous? Overeaters? Emotions Anonymous? Debtors? It's like 60 something, somebody said. That's a lot. So it's got a lot of great social change and implications, but starts with just us getting better, right? So show me how to do it. Show me how to do it.
Okay. It is important that we remain anonymous because we are too few at present to handle the overwhelming number of personal appeals which may result from this publication. Being mostly business or professional folk, we could not well carry on our occupations in such an event. We would like it understood that our alcoholic work is an avocation. In writing or speaking publicly about alcoholism, we urge each of our fellowship to admit his personal name, designating himself instead as a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. Very earnestly, we ask the press also to observe this request, for otherwise we shall be greatly handicapped.
Okay. So in the beginning, there was a social stigma, and there still is. You know, you don't lead in an interview with, hey, I'm an alcoholic. You gotta keep it. And so it says when writing or speaking publicly, we don't use our last name. We don't have our face on the screen. We're not supposed to be on social media saying, hey, I'm in an AA meeting, you know, even posting about our AA birthdays, you know, and 12 steps. The problem is, first of all, we're supposed to stay anonymous. It helps keep us humble. And it doesn't give us the credit. You know, if we really think about it, how much did I have to do with me getting sober? Mostly the drinking part. That's the part I put into it. You know, it keeps us in the right state of mind, realizing that a higher power did this for us. And that's why they say, just designate yourself as a member, just another bozo on the bus. And then they ask the press to do the same thing. If you look at old newspaper clippings, you'll see, and like the Jack Alexander article and some of those magazine articles that came out in the old days, all these men in white shirts and ties with black over their eyes, just a big black, you know, like a magic marker. So to keep everybody anonymous, but of course, too, because these people are all having jobs, you can't be walking in off the street half drunk and say, I got talking like blood, or, you know. So they say, keep us from being exposed.
Okay, we are not an organization in the conventional sense of the word. There are no fees or dues whatsoever. The only requirement for membership is an honest desire to stop drinking. We are not allied with any particular faith, sect, or denomination, nor do we oppose anyone. We simply wish to be helpful to those who are affected. We shall be interested to hear from those who are getting results from this book, particularly from those who have commenced work with other alcoholics. We should like to be helpful to such cases. Inquiry by scientific, medical, and religious societies will be welcomed.
Okay, so, sorry. So honest desire. Honest was taken out because that's not something we can check at the door. Hey, are you honest? Yeah. Okay, you can come in. You think about being honest? You can't come in. All right, so it's not something we can check. We hope that eventually we'll get honest with ourselves. That's where it starts. And then it talks about all we care about. We are not affiliated with any other thing that would divide us. Okay? We are connected by one thing, and that's the common suffering of alcoholism, right? That's it. And then it says, we wish, which is the authors of this book, the recovered alcoholics, we wish to be helpful. If you remember, that's supposed to be our motivation here, to be helpful. And that we do that so that we stay recovered. And it says, so that's altruism as well. So we'd like to be helpful to those who are afflicted. Now that's, you know, a torturous condition to be afflicted. So it's not just someone who thinks they drink too much. We might be able to help them eventually, but not if they're not afflicted, not if they're not suffering. And then they talk about how they would like, especially to hear from people in the scientific, medical, and religious societies. And that's because that's where they used to send us. I've got a friend who often says, I thought I needed an exorcism. She thought she really needed to go through some religious ceremony to have the devil excised from her body. Okay. Medical, you know, we get sent to hospitals, but once we're not drunk, they tune us back out because there's not much else they can do for us. So that what they're saying is we'd like to hear from you guys and how you're doing, especially if you start working with people in this book. We want to see if you're getting results like we did. Yes, good point. This manner of living, right? So how do they put it? Let's see. We are sure that our way of living has its advantages for all. So if we go back to what we know, what they're talking about is living these 12 steps. You'll see later on in how it works. The principles we have set down are guides to progress. The principles are these steps. So what they're saying is learn how to live this on a daily basis. That's why we go, we're talking about my sponsor took me through the steps. Yes, we go through the steps. We learn how to apply those in everyday life. It becomes a way of living. The way of living is not, okay, I got to wake up and pray and then make sure I hit a meeting. That's what a lot of people start to think about as a way of living. But there's so much more. There's self-analysis. There's reflection. There's making mistakes. There's making up for making mistakes. There's things you do. There's helping others. And that's all embedded in the actions behind these steps. But once we do them habitually, they are a way of living.
Thank you.
Well, I learned that they don't correct people that they're not invested in. My boss used to tell me, we like you. We want you to succeed. This is why we're going over this, and so it changes your perspective. If we can get some maturity and not think that everybody's out to get me, maybe there's a payoff. I like to try to explain to the women I sponsor, this is also you can really show up for your I have to want to show up, so I'm off the hook. But a lot of you guys have people that are counting on you. And if you can keep commitment to a meeting or to a sponsor or to a friend in AA, then your kids will trust you and your family will trust you and they'll see that you're really living differently. And that's really what this is about. They want to see a change in behavior. They don't want to hear us say, well, I'm going to my meetings, I'm doing this, and I can still be a smarty pants. Like, oh, it's pretty different. So it is. It's a way of living which has its advantages for all. Everybody. Yes, Matt. Thank you. Yeah, an avocation. We do it for fun and for free.
Yeah. Okay. Forward to the second edition. Figures given in the scroll describe the fellowship as it was in 1955. Since the original forward to this book was written in 1939, a wholesale miracle has taken place. Our earliest printing voiced the hope that every alcoholic he journeys will find the fellowship with Alcoholics Anonymous at its destination. Already continues to be the early next 2s and 3s and 5s of us have sprung up in other communities. 16 years have elapsed between our first printing of this book and the presentation in 1955 of our second edition. In that brief space, Alcoholics Anonymous has mushroomed into nearly 6,000 groups, whose membership is far above 150,000 recovered alcoholics. Groups are to be found in each of the U.S. states and all of the provinces of Canada. AA has flourishing communities in the British Isles, the Scandinavian countries, South Africa, South America, Mexico, Alaska, Australia, and Hawaii. All told, promising beginnings have been made in some 50 foreign countries and U.S. possessions. Some are just now taking shape in Asia. Many of our friends encourage us by saying that this is but a beginning, only the augury of a much larger future ahead.
Okay, so an augury is a sign, okay, just so you know. But a couple of important things here. They wrote the book so that we could get these stats into more people's hands in a way that doesn't garble the message. If you ever played the game telephone or operator at the dinner table where someone starts with a secret or a sentence and you go around the table and by the time it gets around the table, it's nothing like it started, okay? So the same thing here. Bill in this book, which is his expanded story, he talks about how they felt it necessary to get it down in a text so that the message wouldn't be twisted and garbled beyond recognition. We wanted to make sure there was a standard, okay, that people could follow, especially if they were alone. Because in the early days, everybody did it however they did it. Some people had notes, and there was only 6 steps, so there was a lot of room for variation. So it was important that they wanted to get something, and it says, the hope was in the earliest printing that every alcoholic who journeys will find the fellowship of AA at its destination. The book is what the seed was. Without the book, how are you going to develop this fellowship? What's it going to spring from? I mean, Alcoholics Anonymous, the meetings were named after the book. So the book is the seed, okay? And then it talks about how quickly it mushroomed. And one of the things that affected that was World War II, all right? That's how this book got into other countries. And I think it's important. What this tells me, as an individual member of AA, take AA with me. When I go on a week's vacation, find time to get to a meeting locally, bring my book, share what I have. Let them share with me. Don't leave it at home. I drank on vacation. I better bring my book on vacation. Okay. So it teaches me in my personal responsibility, take AA with me. All right. And exactly. And they use the word recovered again. So I want to give you an analogy that my first sponsor gave me, recovered versus recovering. So think of life as a NASCAR race. All right. And everybody in their own car is living their life, going around the track of life. Okay. And I'm in my car and I go into the spin that is alcoholism. And I start spinning off the track and I end up off the track. Or maybe right before I go off the track, I take a bunch of actions that correct my path. Now I'm back in life, recovered from the spin. Okay. So I'm still in the race. I didn't wreck completely out of the race. I got recovered and I'm back in the race in my own little car. Okay. So we take actions. And if I stay on the path, I won't go off on the third turn. Okay. So I got to keep the actions. I'm going to hold the wheel steady around the road. I think I'll go over here for a second. So that's how my sponsor explained it to me, recovering from the spin.
Good one.
All right.
Okay. The spark that was to flare into the first AA group was struck in Akron, Ohio in June 1935 during a talk between a New York stockbroker and an Akron physician. 6 months earlier, the broker had been relieved of his drink obsession by a sudden spiritual experience, followed by a meeting with an alcoholic friend who had been in contact with the Oxford groups of that day. He had also been greatly helped by the late Dr. William D. Silkworth, a New York specialist in alcoholism, who is now accounted no less than a medical saint by AA members, and whose story of the early days of our society appears in the next pages. From this doctor, the broker had learned the grave nature of alcoholism. Though he could not accept all the tenets of the Oxford groups, he was convinced of the need of moral inventory, confession of personal defects, restitution to those harmed, helpfulness to others, and the necessity of belief in independence.
Okay. So the spark, of course, is something that ignites a bigger fire. And this happened when Bill Wilson went to New York and Akron. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that after the next couple of paragraphs. But what's important is the word obsession is used for the first time on this page. And the obsession is at the crux of our mental problem. Okay. So it's important to know what the word obsession means. Now we kind of know I'm obsessed. I have a little obsession with Giancarlo Stanton right now, who's a player for the Yankees, but he's not making me do anything crazy.
What about Johnny Depp?
Well, not too crazy. Well, that was then. See, that's the other thing about obsessions. We can change them up, right? Before Johnny Depp, there was Tom Petty. Before that, Al Pacino. So, just stay with me. But an obsession is a persistent and often unreasonable idea or emotion. A persistent, often unreasonable idea or emotion that cannot be put out of the mind. Think about the things you obsess over besides the drink or the drug. And those obsessions look like, I can't drink. Maybe we can just have one drink. No, we can't have a drink. We're not going to drink today. Maybe tomorrow. But it's all about either drinking or not drinking. Or maybe it's about drugging or not drugging. Or maybe it's about Johnny Depp. And I can't stop thinking about Johnny Depp. And I can't stop watching movies about Johnny Depp. But usually it's something you can't get your mind off. If you're trying to get your mind off drinking, how successful are you? If you don't have a program, you're back to drinking. So it's something that's so strong mentally that it compels you forward to do the action. And that's what we have to break here, because we can't do anything about the allergy. So what we're trying to do is intervene on this persistent, often unreasonable idea that overrides all other ideas. Right? For us, the drink obsession is deadly. The Johnny Depp obsession is just a little nuts. But the drink obsession is deadly. Okay? And then it talks about how he was relieved by this obsession by a sudden spiritual experience. Some people have those. So even if we have a really strong spiritual experience, unless it's followed up by other actions that keep the channel clear, it may not stick. Okay? And so what it goes on to talk about is his friend Ebby had been in contact with the Oxford groups. And the Oxford group showed him a way of living in these 6 steps, which changed the way he thought and lived. And those are outlined on page 263. Okay. So, pretty sure, Kristen.
Yeah.
Okay. So the 6 steps are there. All right. And what I love about what Bill says about this, he could not accept all the tenets of the Oxford groups. The Oxford groups were very exclusive. They did not, it wasn't all inclusive. They had certain acceptable beliefs and practices that Bill wasn't completely behind. and he wanted something more focused on alcoholism. But what I loved is what he says. He was convinced of the need for moral inventory, the absolute need to get into our gut and find out what's been eating our lunch. Right? The things that are buried with some kind of conscious memory and things that are subconsciously buried because they still do harm. So there's a need for moral inventory, a need for confession of personality defects. Restitution is a need to make things right to the best of our ability. That's what gives us back that's what gets rid of some of the guilt. I do the very best I can to make it right. And then it talks about helpfulness to others. I've got something that helps me, so now I can help others with it. And it's crazy how the more we do this, the more natural it becomes. Our thinking really does shift from what about me to what about them? And it never shows up more than when I'm hanging out with normal people who don't live this way. And the selfishness is so evident. It's like, oh, how can you? I can't. But anyway, and then it says, so that all these are the needs, right? And the necessity, and I like how this is broken down. It says the necessity of belief in and dependence upon God. It's okay if we don't depend in the beginning. You know what I mean? People say you just got to come in here and trust God. Well, I don't know about that. I'll go with I suspect there's something greater. How's that? I'll start with a suspicion and see where it goes. But I don't walk in here depending on God. God's going to make it all okay. It's all going to work out. That is relational, and that takes time. Anytime you meet, they talk about we're going to get a new relationship with our Creator. Anytime you need somebody new, you don't know if you can trust them or not. You got to develop a relationship. You got to walk with them a while. You got to see, you got to feel, you have to experience. So the more we fake it, that's what's going to grow it. So it's okay if you don't depend. It's okay if you don't believe. It's okay if you suspect. Because we need, we're going to walk through this and it's going to change the way we think as we walk through it. Okay?
Or Kip? Anyone?
Let's read 3 more paragraphs.
Prior to his journey to Akron, the broker had worked hard with many alcoholics on the theory that only an alcoholic could help an alcoholic. But he had succeeded only in keeping him sober himself. Broker had gone to Akron on a business venture which had collapsed, leaving him greatly in fear that he might start drinking again. He suddenly realized that in order to save himself, he must carry his message to another alcoholic. That alcoholic turned out to be the Akron physician. This physician had repeatedly tried spiritual means to resolve his alcoholic dilemma, but had failed. But when the broker gave him Dr. Silkworth's description of alcoholism and its hopelessness, the physician began to pursue the spiritual remedy for his malady with a willingness that he had never before been able to muster. He sobered never to drink again up until the moment of his death in 1950. This seemed to prove that one alcoholic could affect another, as no non-alcoholic could. It also indicated that strenuous work, one alcoholic with another, was vital to permanent recovery. Hence, the 2 men set to work almost frantically upon alcoholics arriving in the ward of the Akron City Hospital. Their very first case, a desperate one, was covered immediately and became AA number 3. He never had another drink. This work at Akron continued through the summer of 1935. There were many failures, but there was an occasional heartening success. When the Bool returned to New York in the fall of 1935, the first AA group had actually been formed, though no one realized it at the time.
I love how things are happening and they're right in the middle and they don't even see the impact. So here's what happens. So Bill's in New York. He has this white light experience and he started to go to the winos in the street, the missions, and he's going and saying, I found God and God cured me of my alcoholism. He's throwing out that spiritual feature. He's going with the attitude is I've got something great and you have to have it. And then you won't be alcoholic. That would give me the heebie-jeebies, I got to tell you. But anyway, it says here, he went with that attitude first and never got anybody sober. The estimate was about 90 people that he tried to impact and try to convert to non-alcohol, to this practice. And so what happened was he only stayed sober himself. Yeah, even though he had this theory that I know that other alcoholics can help other alcoholics. That's the magic. So he goes into Akron on a business venture which had collapsed. And what happens there? He's greatly in fear he might start again. So now there's a shift. Now he's not like, everything's great. I got this God thing you have to have. He's like, oh my gosh, I'm in a terrible spot. I'm full of resentment. I'm on shaky ground. I want to give up. And he has a shift in approach. He realizes, I need to do this so that I am saved. So he's no longer acting like the big savior. Now he's reaching out because he knows it's going to save his life. That's a whole different way. And that kind of happened kind of by accident because it says he suddenly realized, and I believe that's a God thing. I think God inspired that moment to say, without this, you're going to be sick again. So in order to save himself, he must carry his message. That's why I don't particularly care if you're people I work with. I don't care if you're having a bad day. More better reason to go to a meeting than not. I don't care if you've been crying for 2 hours and you don't look good. Go to the meeting. No, really, I had a woman who said, I've been crying all day. I can't go. I'm like, are you kidding me with this? This is when we go, when we're sick, right? And so it talks about how the person he helped was Dr. Bob, the Akron physician. Now, Bob he's a doctor, but he was under the impression that alcoholism is a character flaw. So he was following the Oxford group. The last 2 years, he'd been following the Oxford groups. He was very attracted to them. He said they were very, they were not ill at ease. They had a great deal of poise. They seemed to be contented. And he's like, I want to learn how to get that. And so he wanted to get that by going, but he still drank. And so, but Bill Wilson was able to explain Dr. Silkworth's aspect, which is the grave nature of the physical problem, that we are condemned by this compulsion to drink, and it's the drinking that's going to kill us. And that's a physical problem. That's an illness. And when the doctor realized, oh my gosh, it's an illness, it's not because I'm a bad person, it gave him a new willingness. It gave him hope. I mean, it gave me hope. I don't know about you, but when I realized that my alcoholism was mental and physical and that these steps will help, and I'm like, yes, I was so glad maybe I wouldn't have to meet a shrink and a couple other specialists. So it says here, when he got that piece of the puzzle from Dr. Silkworth, it says he began to pursue the spiritual remedy. He went after it. And it says the spiritual remedy for his malady. Now, a malady is a chronic and deep-seated disorder. Just a little cold. That's something he's had for years, and he's not been able to do anything about it. So he's going to pursue a spiritual remedy, which now he understands, even though it's a physical problem, there's a spiritual remedy. He was so close. And then it said, with a willingness he had never before been able to muster. I love that word muster too. You kind of have to gather it all up. You got to reach as deep as you can. All right. It says he sobered never to drink again up to the moment of his death in 1950. This proved Bill Wilson's theory that only an alcoholic can help another alcoholic. But it further proved what on the top of the next page? It also indicated that strenuous work, one alcoholic with another, was vital to permanent recovery. A couple of things here. Work. Something I have to exert myself in. Sometimes the exertion is just getting over myself and doing it. But nonetheless, what it says is it's going to be vital to permanent recovery. I didn't even know you could use the word permanent. It's synonymous. We're talking about temporary sponsors and one day at a time, and all of that is true, but we can have permanent recovery if we get in this path and stay here. And that gave me a lot of hope. And then it says, hence. The very next word says hence. Okay, so it indicates strenuous work, one alcoholic with another, vital to permanent recovery, hence. And hence means for this reason. It's not just a cute way to start a sentence. All right? So what they're saying is for this reason, because it's vital to permanent recovery, we're going to set to work frantically upon alcoholics arriving in the hospital. They're like, we're going to get on this and right now. And then, of course, the very first case, a desperate one. Anybody ever get a hold of AA before they felt like they were desperate? Yeah. Did you? So even before, but did it work? Did you want to be here? Okay. So really not that desperate. It's almost like even when we get here, if we still think, when I first got here, I'm like, you people really need sponsors. I got a job. I got a checkbook. I got a nice car. I'll see you. And when I came back, about 10, 12 months later, I was a desperate wreck and I thought I was going to kill myself. So desperate isn't a bad place to be, is it? It somehow opens our ears. It's right. Action against resistance. Who knew we were going to have physics here? Thanks, everybody, for giving me.